Go buy me some coffee. The young department head, Travis, said a few words and looked down on us as he tossed a dollar coin in our direction. The sound of the coin clattering on the floor echoed through the room, followed by the snickers of the employees. Just then, the door burst open with a loud bang, drawing everyone's attention. There stood President Arnold, his face pale and trembling uncontrollably. My name is Luke Cash. At 39, I am the chairman of a conglomerate overseeing 50 group companies. They say your name reflects who you are, and right now, I can say I'm living up to mine, overflowing with wealth and shining brightly. That being said, it hasn't all been smooth sailing. Just because someone has a lucky name doesn't mean they're guaranteed an easy life. Otherwise, the world would have no hardship. Still, I'm proud of the fact that I worked hard to live up to the name I was given. When I was born, my family was relatively well off. Though I don't remember much, I've been told my father made a fortune through investments. However, when the bubble burst, things took a turn for the worse. We lost almost everything, and my father's company collapsed, leaving behind nothing but debt. It dwindled from its peak, shrinking in size, and eventually became little more than a name before going bankrupt. By then, the debt was minimal. But my parents still couldn't find work. With no other options, we moved back to my mother's family farm. Luckily, my maternal grandparents welcomed my father with open arms. You were the only ones who helped us when the farm was in trouble. Now, it's our turn to help you. With those words, my grandfather patted my father's shoulder, and tears streamed down my father's face. I later learned that a hurricane had once devastated the crops, leaving my grandparents with no income for the year. They specialized in high-end, limited edition crops, and the storm dealt a severe blow. So they were at a loss as to how difficult it would be to even get through that year. With no other recourse, they were on the verge of selling off their land and fields, but my father extended financial support just in time. That support lasted for several years, enabling them to rebuild, including implementing disaster prevention measures. This was long before my father struck it rich, back when my parents were newlyweds. I was about 5 when we moved to my grandparents' farm, and it was around that time that I first truly understood the proverb, "One good turn deserves another." That moment became a deep, lasting memory as I grew older. This event, which left a lasting impression on me during my childhood, became deeply etched in my heart as I grew older. Growing up in the countryside, surrounded by fields, I helped with farming while studying and working part-time to improve the efficiency of our business transactions. Eventually, I was accepted into a prestigious university abroad. While my grandparents were sad to see me go so far away, my parents were thrilled. Do what you want, the way you want to do it. My father, who once had the presence of a company president, had fully become a farmer. However, after he started helping with my grandparents' work, sales steadily increased. I remain deeply grateful that he funded most of my overseas education, despite my intention to cover it with my part-time job earnings. Even though the farm had grown steadily, handling only a small number of premium varieties meant that having savings for emergencies was always a good idea. Yet, my father went as far as dipping into those savings to send me money while I was studying abroad, ensuring I wouldn't struggle. In reality, living overseas was tough due to the differences in costs and culture, and the support I received, not just financially but also in the form of food shipments, was a huge help. Thanks to that, by the time I graduated, I had made connections with friends and companies overseas, and I returned home full of optimism. While my grandparents and parents were just happy to have me back, I wasn't content to stop there. I was determined to repay all the kindness and support I had received. Fueled by that desire, I launched my own business as soon as I returned to Japan. The friends I studied with at university all shared the same Japanese background, and the classmates I recruited also joined. A group of eager young people came together, and what started out like a club activity eventually became a company. Although we had knowledge in our respective fields, we lacked experience. Because of that, we faced many failures, but each time, we managed to get through it with the advice and support of university professors. Companies I became close with overseas, and friends. Before I knew it, most of the original members had moved on to other paths. Yet, the company we built had grown into a conglomerate with 50 group companies, and I found myself the chairman of this vast enterprise. Managing such 50 group companies requires great effort. Of course, I make sure to check in and ask if there are any internal issues. We've even set up hotlines for reporting problems. These hotlines are centralized at the main office to streamline reporting to the executives. In serious cases, I would be contacted directly, but typically I just receive a report after the issue has been resolved. And all I have to do is review and sign off on it. So far, no unresolved problems have ever reached me directly from headquarters. I was impressed with how well everything seemed to be handled, but then a thought crossed my mind. While the branches seem fine, what about the headquarters? The main office is the hub for those hotlines, after all. Perhaps some of the employees there have things they find difficult to speak up about. Normally, these things are wrapped up during the internal audits we conduct several times a year. But I started feeling the need to see the state of the company with my own eyes. So, whenever I had some leeway at work, I began reaching out to the president and, while keeping my identity hidden, posed as a branch employee just visiting, to observe what was happening at headquarters. While I trusted the current president and his team, since they chose the staff and executives, there was still a part of me that wanted to verify things for myself. This time, my visit to headquarters followed the same pattern, but there was another reason as well. Just last week, I wanted to check in on Simon, who recently joined us mid-career. Simon is a college classmate and one of the founding members of this company. The success of the company is partly due to his contributions. After graduating, Simon was fortunate to marry his fiancée right away. However, with the company growing rapidly, he hardly had time to spend with his wife before their child was born. His wife, who had always been in fragile health, had to stay in the hospital for an extended period, making it hard for her to care for the baby. And at the time, our company wasn't exactly known for offering high salaries despite the heavy workload. After much deliberation, Simon informed me of his decision to take an offer from a major IT company, bowing his head as he told me, "I'm sorry I can't stay to help until the end." To Simon, I simply said, "It can't be helped. Don't worry about it. Just take care of your wife." The new company paid well and even offered paternity leave for men. Simon used the leave to dedicate himself to caring for his wife and newborn until she was discharged. More than 10 years have passed since then. Recently, the major IT company he worked for went under, leaving Simon jobless. That's when I reached out to him, asking, "How about working with us again?" Simon, who said, "I was struggling to find a new job," happily accepted the offer. Curious about how Simon was doing after being rehired, I decided to visit. Simon joined one of our group companies, which focuses on IT services. It's one of the top performing companies in the group and is often considered an elite branch. Although I want employees to have a sense of healthy competition, I don't believe in ranking or elitism within the group. Each company has different concepts and products. Some companies are bound to have slower growth, and I'm grateful for those that manage to maintain steady performance, even without skyrocketing growth. As a chairman, I've made sure to communicate this philosophy to the employees, but that doesn't mean it has fully sunk in with everyone. I had overlooked something so simple. To get back on track, I visited the company Simon had joined. Since this was an unannounced visit, President Arnold, flustered, quickly handed me a temporary employee badge and said, "Feel free to look around." However, he looked pale and nervous, making me regret coming without notice. I knew that having me, the chairman, drop by unexpectedly would be stressful for him. I told him I only wanted to check on a specific department and would leave soon after, then stepped out of his office. I headed straight to the room marked IT department, where I spotted a familiar figure and called out, "It's been a while, Simon." Simon turned around at the sound of my voice. "Luke, thanks for everything lately." We shook hands, catching up for the first time in a long while. At that moment, a loud, youthful voice echoed through the room. "Hey, newbie. Slacking off again, are you?" "I'm sorry, Travis. I just ran into an old friend." Simon bowed to the young department head, who looked to be in his 30s. "You too. If you're just here to observe, don't get in the way of the employees," the head shouted at me, and I humbly bowed my head as well. "Oh, I apologize." At the same time, a question started forming in my mind. Slacking off at work? Simon? The word impossible came to my mind. Simon is one of the most diligent men I know. On top of that, he laid the foundation for the IT company he's now working for. There's no way he would slack off at work. However, Simon casually raised his hand to me with a "sorry about that" and returned to his work. Only Travis remained. I decided to ask the department head, Travis, casually. Simon and I were college classmates. "He's impressive, isn't he?" "Ha! He's just a guy we hired mid-career after his company went bankrupt right before he turned 40. Travis spoke, his words dripping with clear disdain. The conditions he demanded when joining were a joke: no overtime, leaving early often. "A man who can't even work properly shouldn't be a full-time employee," Travis muttered with a sneer. And the situation started to become clear to me. Simon's wife has always been sickly, and their child is only just about to turn 10. If something happened at school, Simon would likely have to leave to pick them up. Taking all of that into account, I hired him on those terms. He has that much skill. In fact, I had considered bringing him on as a consultant, working only a few hours a week, but Simon had laughed it off, saying, "If I showed up out of the blue, it would just confuse the other employees." That's why I had only told everyone that he was hired mid-career from a bankrupt company, but this is the result. Travis's sense of entitlement made him look down on Simon. Even though I hadn't disclosed Simon's accomplishments, his ability should have been obvious through his work, or so I thought. After talking to some of the other employees, I learned that, due to his inability to work overtime or the uncertainty of when he might need to leave early, Simon wasn't given any real tasks. Instead, he was stuck doing menial chores like making tea, organizing documents, running the shredder, and taking out the trash. Angered by this, I confronted Simon. "Why aren't you complaining about this?" "I didn't bring you back here to do this kind of work." Simon gave me a wry smile. "Travis is Mr. Arnold's son." "So what?" "I'm the chairman." "That's true, but..." Simon trailed off. Simon himself was one of the company's founders. Yet, he just laughed and accepted the situation. Travis is trying so hard to impress his father. "Honestly, it's kind of endearing," Simon said, seemingly unbothered. "Plus, I get to leave on time without any overtime, which is really helpful." But this isn't the work you want to be doing, is it? Well, no. But even just watching the progress is enjoyable for me. It seems Simon wasn't interested in improving the situation, and since he felt that way, I thought it best to leave it at that. At least, that's what I thought until what I saw next made me reconsider. Hey Simon, organize these documents too. The shredder's jammed. Get to work. Got it. Sorry about that, Simon replied. It wasn't just Travis, but other employees were also treating Simon harshly. Travis didn't step in or reprimand anyone. It seemed they never intended to give him any meaningful work. Watching Simon being treated like he was invisible, I was filled with frustration. I didn't care if Travis was President Arnold's son. Seeing my talented friend being looked down upon by this younger man irritated me to no end. But Simon didn't seem to mind and kept working. Knowing him, I understood that despite his technical expertise, he preferred a work-life balance that allowed him to prioritize his family, even if it meant putting up with some dissatisfaction. If that's how he wanted to handle things, I wasn't in a position to interfere. The IT department was full of young employees, with Simon being the oldest. Maybe, to them, belittling an older mid-career hire was their way of blowing off steam. However, I was furious that my employees were treating one of their own in such a degrading manner. Even if we had a proper hotline for complaints, someone like Simon wouldn't use it. Just as I was wondering what to do, it was time for lunch, so I invited Simon to join me. It had been a while since we last saw each other, and even though we could discuss the future another time, I wanted to enjoy our meal together today. Hey, Simon. Let's grab lunch together. As I headed toward Simon to suggest this, Travis, who had spotted us, appeared with an arrogant attitude. Oh, you two are together? Perfect. I'm about to have lunch with my dad too. I wasn't sure what he meant by perfect, but Simon gave me a look that said, sorry about this. It must be a regular occurrence for him. Before I could wonder what was happening, Travis sneered and said, go buy me some tea, tossing a dollar coin at us. The sound of the coin clattering on the floor echoed, followed by the stifled laughter of the other employees. Suddenly, the door burst open with a loud bang, and everyone's attention turned toward it. There stood President Arnold, pale as a sheet and trembling. Dad? What are you doing standing there? Travis asked, hurrying over to his father, clearly alarmed by his shaking figure. But President Arnold didn't even acknowledge his son. Instead, he dropped to his knees and bowed deeply. I deeply apologize. Chairman Cash, are you hurt? The room fell silent. Dad, what are you talking about? He's just a trainee from the branch. What are you saying? This is the chairman, here to check on his friend. President Arnold explained, and Travis's face grew paler by the second. Wait. He's not a trainee from the branch, but the chairman? Travis stammered as he slowly looked at me, terrified. I simply nodded. With a sharp intake of breath, Travis dropped to his knees beside his father and bowed deeply. I had no idea. Please forgive my ignorance and behavior. He stammered, trying to explain himself. Meanwhile, the other employees watched with fearful expressions, too scared to intervene. As for me, I was beyond furious at how Simon had been treated, and I'm sure my face reflected that. Amidst the tense atmosphere, it was Simon who finally spoke up. His usual calm tone lightened the mood. Luke, your face is way too scary. Didn't I tell you to tone it down when you get mad? Come on, say something to them. His words snapped me back to reality. If I let President Arnold and Travis stay in this groveling state, I'd be no better than they were. Both of you, stand up for now. I'll accept your apologies later. First, I want to hear about the current state of this department. At my words, the two of them slowly stood up. However, their eyes still showed fear, and their faces remained pale. Simon, are you okay with this? Do I really have to come alone? Of course. I replied, taking his hand and leading him, along with President Arnold and Travis, to the meeting room. I sat on the high-quality sofa at the head of the room, while President Arnold and his son sat on the long sofa next to me. Across the table, on the opposite sofa, Simon sat alone. Travis, still not fully grasping why Simon was there, occasionally shot glares at him, only to be scolded by President Arnold. It seemed Travis could no longer contain himself. Mr. Cash, I deeply apologize for the disrespect, but why is Simon here? Before President Arnold could rush to stop him, I responded to Travis directly. He's my close friend. I was curious if he was working in a good environment, so this visit is purely personal. Don't worry about it. But, just as I was about to address his treatment of Simon, Travis interrupted. So what? Don't you think the way Simon is being treated is overly preferential? He can't do his job properly as a full-time employee. Travis said boldly, and President Arnold buried his head in his hands. Is that really true? Have you ever assigned him a proper task after reviewing his experience and conditions? At my somewhat cold words, Travis faltered. He admitted that from the start, Simon had only been assigned basic tasks like clocking in and out, never allowing him to use the computer for anything more. Hearing this, my anger flared up again. Who do you think Simon is? I was about to shout, but it was Simon himself who stopped me. Calm down, Luke. It's also my fault for not saying anything. But so what? What does Simon being close to Mr. Cash have to do with anything? That's no reason to bring personal matters into work. It was clear that Travis was irritated by Simon's attempts to calm the situation. In Travis's outburst, it became painfully obvious that he had no idea who Simon really was. Come to think of it, President Arnold didn't know much about Simon either. President Arnold had been hired during a time when we were in need of talent, after Simon had already left. And perhaps he hadn't fully understood Simon's value. I glanced at Simon, then spoke to him directly. Simon, I'm partly to blame for not explaining things, but it's also a problem that you didn't speak up. Yeah, maybe. Should I be the one to explain? Yes, but let me say this first. I looked directly at President Arnold and Travis. I said Simon is a close friend, but that's not all. He was one of the founding members of this company. President Arnold and Travis were left speechless. Yeah, that's true. But due to certain circumstances, I had to step away. I'm sure I caused trouble for Luke, Simon said apologetically. And honestly, he was right. The circumstances were understandable, so I never complained, but Simon had been the core of our IT department. Even now, the core system we use is still based on what he built, and the easy-to-understand manual he left behind saved us more than once. No, I should say it was thanks to him that we managed to keep things going. The one who really stepped up was President Arnold, who is now leading the company. At the time, I was desperately searching for someone to replace Simon and handle our IT needs. That's when I randomly met Silas Arnold. Silas sat alone in the park, staring blankly, tears streaming down his face as he confessed that he had been laid off and couldn't bear to face his family. When I asked, he told me he was in his late 40s. It's certainly a tough age to find a new job. I wondered if, based on his experience, I might be able to hire him at my company. Out of sympathy, I brought up the idea, and he looked at me, wide-eyed in surprise. Later, he held onto the business card I gave him as if it were precious, bowed deeply, and we parted ways. When he showed up for the interview, I was shocked after reviewing his resume. I was convinced he could be the one to follow in Simon's footsteps. So Simon was the one who created that foundational system. President Arnold murmured, staring at Simon in astonishment. Simon gave a modest smile, looking slightly embarrassed. That's right. I wrote the manual and left it for those who came after me. I was surprised at how well it's been optimized over the past 10 years. I'm glad to hear that. When I first saw the system, I was amazed by how innovative it was. I became so absorbed in working with it that, before I knew it, I'd become president. Arnold said with a chuckle, to which Simon responded with a warm smile. I'm glad it was you who took over after me. Luke has always had a good eye for people. I felt a bit embarrassed at the compliment, though I believed luck had played a large part. Meanwhile, Travis, who had been listening to our conversation, wore an expression that was hard to read. Finally, he hesitantly spoke up. May I say something? All of us older folks turned to him, causing him to flinch for a moment before he straightened up and began speaking. I'm grateful to Mr. Cash. I joined this company to repay a debt. A debt? I don't recall doing anything for you, I replied, tilting my head in confusion. But Travis slowly shook his head. You saved my father. Back then, he was unfairly laid off by a boss who disliked him, and it was unbearable to watch. Travis's eyes, filled with compassion as he looked at President Arnold, were those of a son who deeply loved his father. At the time, our family was really struggling. My mother worked part-time, and I had a part-time job just to keep us going. So we had almost given up hope of my father finding another job. President Arnold nodded repeatedly in agreement with Travis's words. He was likely recalling those difficult times. I remembered the hopeless expression on Silas's face when I first met him in the park. It was hard to watch, he was in such a terrible state. It was around that time when my father got accepted at an interview with a rapidly growing company, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled again. President Arnold looked at Travis, surprised by his words. And not only that, but he was placed in the IT department, where he could fully use his skills. It meant so much to us. At the time, our company was extremely busy, and President Arnold worked tirelessly, without regard for his own well-being. It was because of these contributions that I appointed him as president. As it turned out, his efforts also saved their family. Travis's mother was able to quit the part-time job she wasn't used to, and Travis could finally focus on his studies. And so, Travis joined the company where his father served as president, earning his place through merit. Travis, the capable and skilled son of President Arnold, took great pride in his abilities. This pride led him to strongly disapprove of anyone he felt was unworthy of working under his father. I thought I was choosing employees based on both their education and abilities. According to Travis, he valued new employees' technical skills and passion for their work. He took pride in the IT department and would report to HR, requesting transfers for those he felt lacked motivation, believing they weren't suited for the department. As he spoke in the past tense, Travis glanced over at Simon. But then, this guy joined mid-career, forced upon us from above. He never worked overtime, often left early, and it infuriated me. Travis clenched his hands tightly on his knees. The deep wrinkles forming in his pants made it clear that he was holding back intense anger. Even during the busiest times, my father worked relentlessly. I knew he was doing it for our family, so I couldn't say anything. For a brief moment, regret flickered in Travis's eyes. But that regret quickly turned into anger, directed at Simon. I get that Simon's talented. He probably has a lot of skills. But why didn't he show them? Isn't he ashamed to take a salary for doing such menial work while being insulted? I see now. I finally understood why Travis had been so harsh toward Simon. He grew up watching President Arnold work tirelessly. Travis himself is extremely serious when it comes to work. However, I've also heard complaints about him being arrogant or overly blunt. But he's silenced his critics through his strong performance and abilities. With such a strong sense of pride, it was no surprise that his IT department was filled with loyalists, leading to the current situation. Simon nodded and said calmly, "Yeah, I was wrong too. I'm sorry. But I didn't mind because I wanted to prioritize my family over work." Having left the company once, Simon had no desire to boast about being one of the founders. Since the work under Travis's leadership was running smoothly, he didn't bother worrying about his treatment. He had always been a laid-back guy, but at this point, it was almost frustrating. "Simon, that's exactly the problem," I said. "I know. I feel bad for dragging you into this, Luke. But can I explain my side of things?" And so, he quietly began explaining his current situation. Simon explained that his wife, who was in fragile health and frequently in and out of the hospital, along with their young child, made it difficult for him to work overtime. If he received a call from the school or hospital, he had to leave early to take care of them. By the time he finished speaking, Travis's face had turned bright red. He then bowed deeply, almost hitting his head on the desk as he apologized. "I'm so sorry, I'm unfit to be a department head. I never bothered to check your situation, and I wrongly labeled you incompetent." His voice trembled, on the verge of tears, as he kept his head down. Beside him, President Arnold also bowed his head in apology. "I deeply apologize for my son's actions. I am equally at fault for not noticing this sooner. Please, allow Simon to take over as president." At this, Simon hastily stood up. "No, please don't. I already left the company once, and with my current situation, the terms I'm under are perfect for me." But then, and what about, a three-way back and forth of apologies began. While the issue had been resolved, with everyone now understanding each other's position and reconciling, this tug-of-war over the presidency erupted because they all respected each other's abilities. And they were doing it all while completely ignoring me, the one who actually decides who becomes president. Finding the whole situation a bit ridiculous, I decided to sit back, sip my coffee, and watch their chaotic debate as if it were background music. In the end, everything was settled, and we continued on as if nothing had happened. Both the president and the department head remained in their positions, and Simon continued working in the IT department. Of course, nothing changed regarding his conditions. He still left work on time and occasionally left early when needed. But after everyone became aware of his situation, no one complained anymore. The one notable change was that Simon's tasks shifted from menial jobs like making tea and organizing documents to maintaining the core systems and training new employees. He was also consulted by Travis on matters like the introduction of new equipment and programs, acting as an advisor. Simon seemed to genuinely enjoy working with the ever-evolving technologies, enthusiastically engaging with his tasks. When I spoke with him, he prefaced his comments by saying, "Well, my old job was easy and nice. But it's great to be working with new technology again, he added with a smile. His cheerful face, full of youthful energy, reminded me of when we first founded the company, and it made me happy to see him like that. "Ah, Mr. Cash, good to see you," Travis said, giving me a quick nod before immediately turning to talk to Simon. His face was serious as he discussed a technical matter that was beyond my understanding, consulting Simon for his opinion. Gone was the arrogance from before. It seemed Simon had fully integrated into the department. Seeing this, I felt reassured and concluded my personal inspection. Still, to rise to president in just 5 years, that's impressive. When I said this to Travis, the new president of our group's IT company, he responded with a bitter expression, "Thank you." I could tell he was likely holding back the urge to shout, "You're the one who appointed me as president." That inability to fully hide his feelings shows he's still young. But given his skills, there's no problem because he's more than capable. His father, President Arnold, had been forced to retire due to long-term hospitalization, likely from overwork. Simon had firmly declined the offer to become president, saying it wasn't for him. So it was Travis, nominated by both of them, who rose to the position. Since the incident, Travis had reflected deeply and lost any sense of entitlement, working sincerely with both his job and his colleagues. He had proven himself capable of handling the responsibilities of president. Recognizing this, his promotion was swiftly decided. In fact, the most overwhelmed by the situation was likely Travis himself. Poor guy. The other group presidents, upon hearing of Simon's return and the events that followed, were eager to take the newly appointed young president under their wing. He'd surely be given a warm, if teasing, welcome at the next executive meeting. I'll offer him some sympathy, though. The other presidents don't dislike him. They just want to celebrate the earnest young president while having a little fun teasing him. I'm really counting on you, so keep up the good work. Yes, sir. Travis replied with enthusiasm. I knew this company is going to keep growing, and I silently vowed to continue creating an environment where everyone could focus on their work, without overlooking even the smallest of issues.